Welcome back, everybody, to me talking Discworld, because it's still weekend and I don't want to suffer Wheel of Time on weekends too. Yeah, that's sort of the plan, and I know I've been slacking off with the Discworld read-along videos. We're still doing the read-along though, so you can join, like, if you're really quick tonight for interesting times. Although I assume by the time this is uploaded we're already having our talk. Then the next one will probably be in 2 weeks, I assume, about the book number 18, Masquerade. So maybe join us for that one. Join the read-along on the Unabridged Burners Discord server. Also, I don't know, like, subscribe, comment, share, do all those things that you can do with the YouTube videos. That would be really cool for me. I've been once again losing subscribers. I wonder why. Probably because I suck. Anyway, let's have us a talk about book number 14. I'm sort of trying to catch up to where I should be. And that is Lords and Ladies. Another good one, right? Ooh, cheers. Alright, let's talk about Lords and Ladies. It's book number 14. It is a Witches book. The next one in the Witches subseries, following after book 12, which was Witches Abroad. And it is followed by Masquerade, which is book 18. So there we are. And it's probably my favorite Witches book. I think, yeah, probably my favorite Witches book. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. What it basically is about, however, is about fairies or elves and folklore. And I'm very interested in that kind of topic in general. So here's the quick plot synopsis for those of you who haven't read it. Then you can go and read it. It's not that long a book. And then you can join us and hear more about, like, what I think about it, right? So this is all about Margaret Garlick, the witch, marrying or planning to marry or being asked to marry or whatever King Verence of Lancre. And the wedding is supposed to take place on Midsummer's Eve, or Midsummer's Days actually. And then things happen because the elves try to come back to the Discworld. Yeah, that's all the plot there is. We'll see how that happens, how Margaret makes it sure that she will actually be Queen of Lancre, and so forth. It's really fun. It has all three witches on top form. It has really intelligent things to say about, folklore and fantasy and stuff. And it also features the wizards and the librarian, so it's a bit of like a best-of almost at this point. Because, yeah, the wizards travel to that whole, like, wedding because they're invited, and then things happen. So, yeah, let's talk about these kind of things. It's another, like, 5 out of 5 stars, turtles, raids, whatever you want to call it. It's a good book. You should go and read it. And then we can talk about it. Done reading? Good. Let's talk. So, as I've said before, I am very much interested in folklore and how folklore changes over time. The questions of whether there is a basis to folklore or not. Those kind of things. So the idea of the fair folk, the fairies, the elves, whatever you want to call them, and how they, fit into Western, mostly Celtic or Northern European or whatever folklore is an interesting one to me. Because, you look at fantasy books and how they, change it over time from what they might have been to what we think of them right now, which is, pointy-eared people that spend way too much time on, hairstyle. So yeah, that part I find very interesting. The Shakespeare jokes, once again, are obviously something that I like a lot. The ideas on, like, what makes witchcraft is another one that I find interesting because, that's also a part of folklore, and, I'm into that kind of stuff from time to time. So yeah, I do like the thing just because of that. But I also want to talk about, like, why this actually works so well as a book, because it does more than just that. There's, like, larger themes. There is, once again, a really good plot. It's, you know, we're in that part of Discworld where Terry Pratchett has discovered plot lines, has discovered characters, and is not only making jokes and satire. And he's become really, really good at it. Especially since now with the sub-series being there for a while, he's had time to establish characters, especially the witches are probably the best established characters by now. We have, you know, Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Ogg, and Magrat, as sometimes referred to as the, you know, the mother, the maiden, and the crone. Or whatever, which, you know, he then kind of goes and subverts, because subverting tropes is something that Terry Pratchett is pretty good at as well. And yeah, that part works really well. We have the more like surreal, absurdist humor, again, a bit stronger in this one than, say, the last one, which was, you know, Small Gods, which is pretty dark. And a lot of that is once again contributed by the wizards showing up with Ridcully, Pondus Stibbons, and the Bursar and the Librarian. They're usually there for like a lot of the jokes. There's another one that we've seen before, which is Kazanander, the dwarf. All of that works really well. But then again, it also gets pretty fucking dark with the elves trying to invade again, and Terry Pratchett's main basic idea that fairies, or the elves, are actually pretty fucking nasty. And only over time, folklore, fairy tales, stories, and whatnot, recollection has, you know, covered them with glamour and made them into something to like and to bow to and whatnot. Whereas at the end of the day, they're actually pretty fucking cruel and brutal and all of those kind of things. They're actually nasty. And them trying to reconquer the land, that's a very interesting, you know, idea about, you know, how to put elves in a fantasy world. And it kind of vibes and rings with that more, like, that darker side of folklore that has always been there. The sort of, like, that hint at, like, some pre-Christian, pre-romantic era kind of style of, like, pagan beliefs and whatnot. That is always on the border of it. Now, why is that interesting? It is interesting because Terry Pratchett is well aware of the fact that a lot of like folklore studies is a construction. It has always been a construction by people who made a lot of that stuff up. We don't have any sources of, you know, pre-Christian England. We have very few sources of pre-Christian England, pre-Christian Germany, whatever. And a lot of that, like, those folk beliefs have never actually been recorded. Like, what has happened is that we have, like, early folklorists in, like, the 17th now, more like the 18th, 19th century, trying to make sense of those kind of things. And it's all, like, most of those sources we have are already seen through the lens of the 19th century Christian, or maybe critical of Christian religion kind of person. But that's sort of what we have. So a lot of that is already made up. So having these layers, I guess, of different versions of elves or like the fair folk in there is an interesting thing, because it ends up with that there being the next level. Basically, it's like you have like elves are glamorous, and then you have like, no, you know what, actually fairies are just, elves or fairies are just, you know, named after flowers and all of that stuff, and to be made light of or fun of and so forth. And that's you know, a very interesting idea of like, maybe that's for humanity to try and make our past more bearable, because then we come to another really important aspect there, and that is the fairy feudalism idea, right? Now, obviously, Discworld is a fantasy world, but it's also a lot of like commentary on our world and whatnot, and the way the elves behave or want to behave is very much a model of feudalism, with them being in charge and having basically divine rights over all their subjects, torturing them and murdering them all the way they want and so forth. And that The other side of that is that because elves are supposed to be, glamorous, good looking, and whatnot, and all of that stuff. The idea there that Pratchett plays with really well is that weird way we still tend to look at royalty, at nobility, at monarchy, and all of that. The idea that they they treat their subjects like possessions. They treat them cruelly. But there's also that inherent weird idea of glamour that attaches to royalty. Now that's something that, like, I guess doesn't work as well in Germany as it does in England, and Pratchett is obviously a British writer and has always had a very specific English or British lens to what he does. So the way he kind of contrasts human feudalism versus like the elf is a large commentary on how over time it is important to free ourselves from that idea that some people, in this case the elves, are better than other people for, like, by divine right, so to speak, by nature better. And you can obviously extend that idea into all kinds of fucked up political views, but that's the basic idea that, like, someone is better by nature and that therefore has the right to treat everyone else like shit. And that's not how it works. And so this story of Lords and Ladies is also very much a story about how over time humanity has gone away from this, has built a society. It's very much about that. There's later on that scene, right, when Granny Weatherwax is talking to the Witch Queen, the Queen of the Elves, about the country fighting back against the invasion of the elves. And the point there is that the country has become a country because of humanity working the land, owning the land, giving it names, using it, having that connection to the land. But it is a human thing, whereas it's a made-up thing. Human kings in this world in Longcra are kings for all kinds of weird reasons, but they are so because their subjects accept them and they are in a relationship with their subjects. They work for the kingdom, not only, possess it. So at the end of the day, this book is very much also an argument for, society, human-made laws versus, some idea of natural laws of superiority and whatnot. It's like over time we have developed this long idea of what it means to be human, what is right, what is wrong, more of morality, of ethics, those kind of things. And we have, and the fact of being alive, of being human, means that we take part of that idea of society. And that's what makes it so difficult for these elves to come back, because they operate on a more basic level, I guess. It's the idea of like iron in the head, which is a fantastic idea that Pratchett plays here with, which is the idea that fairies hate iron or are vulnerable to iron, right? And he extends that. It's like what iron basically means is not just the material, but what it means is progress. What it means is a more analytical view of the world, the idea of figuring out technology, figuring out science, thinking rationally, and taking those things make us human, right? Thinking rationally makes us human. Obviously, there's all kinds of like emotions and stuff involved, but at the end of the day, that's what makes humans humans. It's a construct at the end of the day, and Pratchett is very much aware of it, and so that's what keeps the elves away. It's like that we work that way. We don't just take anything on faith. And in a way, royalty is a bit of at least the divine right style of monarchy is very much a remnant of that older, darker side of things. And here it's interesting because, Terry Pratchett's philosophy overall is a very pragmatic one, I would say, because he's well aware of, and he goes out of his way to make that clear, that we as humans also always yearn for that part. We wish for elves, we have fantasy, we have imagination, and we have this yearning for things to not just be about iron. We also want the fairy gold. We want those things, right? And whether those are the glamour and stuff of the elf queen, or the even more basic, more animalist side of things, which is expressed through the witch king, the elf king, or king of the elves, who is more like faun, or a satyr in idea. There's all kinds of other names for that dude, but that aspect, that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But Terry Pratchett is well aware of that internal struggle in every single human between our rational and our emotional, our intuitive, our more animal part. He's aware of it. He's like, but giving that part free rein would be a terrible idea. That's sort of what we see there. It's like, be aware of it, indulge it from time to time. That's all fine, but don't go too far, because then you lose what makes you a human, what makes you human. Yeah, what makes you human, basically. So that's one of the large arguments in this book. There's more in it, but that overall argument that accepting authority because of any form of natural superiority is wrong, because it doesn't exist. Everyone is equal, and we can decide to put someone above us as whatever. In this case, king is fine, but that's a human choice we make. It's not about a natural superiority. And that is the overall argument, I would say, in this book. As I said, let's look at the other stuff. There is a long debate on what makes witchcraft. Now, Terry Pratchett is obviously very involved with this, the idea of witchcraft as a sort of traditional thing. We have the three witches with their different approaches to it, which are, kind of built on the village wise woman who does a bit of healing, does a bit of all of these kind of stuff. And then we have the younger generation of witches, which is very much poking fun at, and when this book was written, which is, I guess, in 1994, 1995, something like that, it is very much poking fun at what you might call the New Age, the 80s, like rediscovery or discovery or invention mostly of certain aspects of spirituality, of esoteric behavior, that kind of stuff, right? And he's very much poking fun at it and saying, that might be for appearance sake. And this is, I think, the lesson there for Terry Pratchett is, right, you can pretend to be, you can wear floppy hats and paint your fingernails black and all of that stuff, and pretend to be a witch. But at its core, witchcraft, in Terry Pratchett's view, and I'm obviously not an expert on witchcraft, not by a long shot, right? Is about working for the community. The power or whatever might be inherent there is not what you do. You do it because you help people to make it, it's hard work is what it is. The power is incidental. And doing it just for appearances or power is the wrong way, which is sort of where you have I don't want to call it conservative, but it's sort of a conservative approach. Like, we have this idea that you work for the community and that can give you powers, or we have people that just do it for pretends and stuff. And you look at, I think that's, I guess, an interesting aspect, because when you look at the first, starts of a New Age movement, a lot of that is about finding yourself, being yourself, it's a very individualist movement, I think, is what makes it so interesting, made it so successful at the time, because we're talking, 70s and 80s, which are very much times about individualism already. So that makes a lot of sense, whereas the witches working for the community, hard for the community, in the case of Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Ogg and Margaret Garlick too, right? And in a way also King Varens, right? That is a different approach. It's not about the individual. Having that aspect in there makes it just like an interesting comment. I'm not going to apply this to the current, rise in witchcraft or witchy interest in social media, because I'm not qualified to do that kind of stuff. And neither was Terry Pratchett, because he wrote that stuff, 25 years ago, 30 years, almost 30 years ago. So it doesn't make that much sense. But I feel it's just interesting that Terry Pratchett has a very specific approach to what he calls witchcraft that is that seems to be closer to the idea than a lot of stuff that came afterwards. And, it kind of works well with Terry Pratchett's approach to folklore and the likes as well. Because what we see there, a lot of it is very much about tools to make humans survive in what is basically a pretty crummy world with a lot of things going wrong. It's like there's all kinds of things we have to make it a bit easier for us. Witchcraft might be one of them. Some might believe in fantasy or elves and stuff. That might just also help make things a bit more acceptable. Then there's, other aspects there that I personally really enjoy. The whole storyline about that old pagan barbarian queen that is just invented out of whole cloth, because it's just a very good comment on how especially folklorists made up stuff. When you look at early folklore studies in the 19th century, it's ridiculous the kind of stuff people made up back then. And Pratchett figuring, making it very clear how that worked with the idea of like how paganism worked, how barbarians work and all that. It just, for someone who studied a bit of medieval history and stuff, it was just really fun to read that. It was like, yeah, that's a good comment there. It's like, we need that stuff in our past because it helps, create a national identity or something. Like Loughran has that for Pratchett. Like, yeah, we also had that barbaric queen, that none of that stuff. Yeah, that helps build an idea of who we are. And if that is just really boring, we tend to invent stuff around it to make it a bit more glamorous, which is sort of where the elves kind of come in. And I think that's something that Terry Pratchett has, a good point about. It's like, even, there's people in this country which is hasn't had hasn't had a monarchy for like over a century by now, which is pretty good, and people are still interested in what like monarchs of other countries do. That idea of glamour that is sort of very difficult to shake is definitely something that I like about like this book being, clear about it. What else is interesting about it though? Because, there's more, of course there's more. And here we talk about the Granny Weatherwax, Mustrum Ridcully, what could have been question. And I think that's the more individual, less about society, but more about the person kind of aspect of this book that is also very, very important. It's important to Terry Pratchett in general, and that is how we deal with the fact that life is made up of choices and that sometimes there might be regrets. And it is also a continuous struggle for most of us on who we are or who we want to be. And in this case, it's that like idea that Mustrum Ridcully and Granny Weatherwax had a bit of a relationship thing going on back in the days, and it then broke up because of all kinds of reasons. They made their choices, they became who they are, and they get the chance to revisit that in a way. And we see different approaches to that. With Britcull, is like, it could have been really great, and all of that stuff. And Granny Weatherwax, you know what? At the end of the day, it could also be really horrible. And this is the choices we made. These are the choices we made. We have to live with them. And then at the same time, we have Magrat Garlic, who is trying to figure out who she wants to be. It's like, and struggling with that idea of who she wants to be. It's something that I can personally very, very much sympathize with. Is like, I'm continuously trying to figure out who I am, and I guess part of why I am, struggling so much with life in general is that I'm often unsure of who I am and who I want to be, right? And I think the fact of like how much our personhood, our identity, is also a construct, and at the end of the day, a construct of ourselves, is part of this. It's like we have to accept the choices that we make because we made them, and that's the first part of it. And then we have to live with them, and then be the person that we want to be. Granny Weatherwax does that all the time, and she's absolutely, through that, a fairly unrealistic character with, some aspects that, show that she's not perfect, but they're still fairly, there's a lot of stuff going down there where it's like, yeah, that's an unrealistic character. On the other side, obviously, Margaret Garlick is also a bit over the top in the way she's described, but, that's the point of these books. Terry Pratchett, while writing characters that have all kinds of facets and change over time, which he definitely does, also still writes something that is a bit more like satire, that is more like comedy, which has larger-than-life characters that, display very much exaggerated facets of the human character, so you can take and, learn lessons from them if you want to. And he does that in a very good way in this one as well. So yeah, the whole idea of regrets, about choices and whether it's okay to have regrets or not, whether it's important to indulge them or not, is the other huge part of this. Now let's look at, some of the just, interesting aspects and fun things before we end this for today. Terry Pratchett certainly has gotten the hang of foreshadowing at this point, and using something that he's been doing that for a while, but he's very good at like using what I would call the macrocosm approach. It's something that I say that because stuff that I studied, I don't have like literary analysis terms like other people. But what it boils down to is that you show something in like an individual person and then apply it to like the universe at large or stuff like that. One part here is obviously the conversation about the bees, about a bee swarm and what happens when you have two queens, which is very explicitly, mirrors the conflict between, that's the big question, Magrat Garlic and the Queen of the Elves, or Nanny or Granny Weatherwax and the Queen of the Elves. It's not quite sure. I'm not quite sure which one at the end of it is, but I guess it should be Magrat Garlic. But he does do that trick, not trick, but pull that off. Was like, yeah, we have the conversation about bees and how horrible it is, but it's also like how it's natural and whatnot. And then we scale it up to like the overall novel, or like the cosmos in a way. He's done the same thing in Small Gods when he goes with Vorbis versus Brother and the Omnian Church, which I spoke about yesterday. He does it again here, and I personally like that approach. It kind of just chimes with me in a way that I personally, find very accessible, I guess. Then there's obviously the whole Shakespeare thing that we haven't spoken about. And Pratchett is obviously good at making Shakespeare jokes because he knows it's Shakespeare, and this is very much a parody in a lot of ways about A Midsummer Night's Dream. And that part is just, there's a lot of like these small jokes about like how theater is done by or used to be done only by male performers up until like fairly recent times, but also about the idea of like the magic of theater or fantasy, that it allows us to drift into this other world. And in Pratchett's case, this is quite literally the case. But it could be, it's also, you know, it's not only like actually that way, but it's a good description that it allows our minds to go to this better place where things are fun. It's the idea of escapism that actually does good, I guess, because it indulges that idea or whatnot. What else is fun? I do obviously always like Nanny Ogg and what Nanny Ogg does and how Nanny Ogg does things. And there's like interesting aspects there when Pratchett has these ideas like what wizardry is, what witchcraft is, the idea of how Nanny Ogg basically organizes the social aspects of witchcraft in a way when she, you know, makes sure that people do stuff and whatnot. And others do not, whereas Granny Weatherwax just uses her powers and does stuff and maybe loses touch with the more social aspects. Yeah, that part is, you know, fun. We get a lot of like Grebo jokes, which is always cool. We have over-the-top comedic aspects like Nanny Ogg doing, getting her bath. That was just like well-executed, over-the-top humor, which I personally just, you know, I enjoyed that bit quite a bit. Oh, and obviously the wonderful bridge troll customs inspection thing, which is just such a good joke overall, with the troll being like the border guard under the bridge and then asking if they have like alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs. And they're like, no, we don't. He's like, would you like to buy some? Sorry, it just really cracks me up every time. I just love that bit. It's just ridiculously funny for some reason. And there's a lot of other aspects of that sort that I think just make this a, you know, a very easy to read kind of book, while still having, as I said, like a good balance of like threats, of, you know, challenges for the characters and everything. It just feels extremely well executed in a way that not all Discworld novels do. Don't get me wrong, we'll come to some of the not so good ones later as well. One final thing, we have like scenes that echo other scenes, because when we take this story, we have another like situation where Magrat Garlic has to face, you know, things down in the dungeons. And we had that all the way back in Weird Sisters, when she does her like magic trick there and like opens the door behind which Granny Weatherwax and I think it's Granny Weatherwax who is locked up in the dungeon. I'm not quite sure, or Nanny Ogg, who knows. I'm getting confused, but we have another scene like that, which is all about making Magrat actually come into herself. And this, I think, is the other part. Now, Magrat finds her strength when she assumes the guise of this fictitious Queen Umchi, or whatever her name is. You know what? Sometimes we need fantasies in our life to actually make us be the people that we want to be. And this, I think, is a good place to end the story, because it once again shows that Terry Pratchett, as an author, was always aware of the fact that literature, that fiction, that fantasy, that imagination is not only an entertaining part of human life, it's sometimes an absolutely vital part that helps us be the people that we want to be. Yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you really enjoy Lords and Ladies. And yeah, I hope to see you soon. So yeah, cheers.